The laughter started somewhere near the lighting rigs. Not loud, just a few voices passing around the same joke. Looks good on film. Someone else added something about camera angles. A couple of the stuntmen grinned. It was the kind of teasing that happens on sets when people had been working long hours together. Across the stage, Bruce Lee heard it. He didn't react. The crew was resetting equipment between takes, cables half-rolled, lights humming softly overhead. It was the late 1960s, and most of the men working that floor had built their reputations. The old way training halls, stunt gyms, years of rough rehearsals. To them, cinema was illusion. Bruce stood quietly near the edge of the set floor, arms loose at his sides. No dramatic pose. No attempt to respond. Just watching the room with that steady calm some people had already begun noticing. Another comment drifted across the stage. Movie tricks. That one carried farther. A few crew members laughed again. Then someone said it a little louder. If it works off camera, show us. The words didn't sound like a challenge, more like curiosity. Bruce finally turned his head, not quickly, just enough to look toward the small group of men watching him. For a second, nobody moved. The room still looked the same, lights, cables, props scattered across the floor. But the feeling had shifted, because in a moment something very small was about to happen. And once it did, no one on that set laughed again. The set looked ordinary until people started watching him. Before that, it was just another pause between takes. A reflector being adjusted. A prop crate dragged a few inches across the floor. Someone crouched near a cable line, pressing tape down with the side of his thumb. The room carried that usual half-noise of a working stage, metal shifting, voices overlapping, lights burning overhead. Bruce Lee stood off to one side and seemed, at first glance, completely still. That was part of what confused people. He didn't carry himself like a man trying to impress anyone. No hard stare, no showmanship, no restless movement meant to remind others what he could do. He waited quietly, shoulders loose, eyes moving across the room as if he was noticing details no one else cared to notice. Some men on that set already knew better than to mistake that calm for softness. By then, Bruce had spent years teaching martial arts in America. Not to crowds, and not as a loud public performance. It was the quieter kind of reputation. The kind that moved from one person to another because something unusual had happened in a private lesson, or during a rehearsal, or in a room where only a handful of people were standing close enough to see clearly. That kind of reputation travels carefully. It also travels unevenly. So on a film set, where most people judged skill through falls, timing, and the rough honesty of stunt work, Bruce still sat in an uncertain place. The camera loved him. That much was obvious. His movements were sharp, fast, precise in a way that made action scenes feel different. But some of the crew believed the camera was doing more than it really was. Not because they hated him, because they had seen too many things made to look real. Two stuntmen near the back had been watching him for a while. One leaned against a crate, arms folded, the other rolling his shoulder as if warming up out of habit. "Fast on film," one of them said. The other smiled. "That's where it matters." It was light, almost harmless. Still, a few nearby crew members picked up the tone. A grip gave a short laugh, without even looking over. Someone else repeated the phrase with a little more confidence, like a joke improving as it traveled. Bruce heard every word. He gave them nothing back. That was where the room began to change, because the people who doubted him expected one of two things: a smile or irritation. Maybe a sharp reply. Maybe some quick defense. What they got instead was silence. Not empty silence, not awkward silence, but the kind that makes other people more aware of themselves. The stunt coordinator looked over then. He had seen enough in rehearsal to know something the others did not. He didn't interrupt. He didn't warn anyone. He only straightened a little and kept watching. Then the same voice came again, clearer this time. "Movie tricks." A few men laughed, and somewhere in that brief laughter, curiosity stopped being casual and became focused, because now the whole set was waiting to see whether Bruce Lee would answer it. For a moment, Bruce Lee didn't move. He just looked toward the group where the laughter had come from. Not sharply, not with irritation, just a quiet glance that acknowledged he had heard. The stuntman who had spoken stood beside a stack of equipment cases. He wasn't trying to start trouble. On most film sets, comments like that were normal. Stunt crews tested each other constantly, sometimes with jokes, sometimes with small demonstrations. To him, this felt the same. Around the stage, work had slowed. A grip stopped halfway through rolling a cable and stayed there. Someone near the camera cart leaned slightly to see past a lighting stand. Even the men who pretended not to watch were listening. Bruce stepped forward into the open space of the floor. The movement was small, but attention followed it immediately. "What would you like to see?" he asked. His voice was calm, almost conversational. The stuntman shrugged. "Something real." A few quiet chuckles drifted through the group again. Bruce nodded once. One of the stuntmen nearby reached down and picked up a small padded shield, the kind they sometimes use during rehearsals to absorb impact from kicks or punches. He handed it over casually. "Hit this," the man said. He held the shield against his chest. It didn't look like a challenge, more like curiosity dressed up as a joke. Bruce stepped closer. He didn't stretch, didn't shake his arms out. He simply stood there for a moment, observing the way the man held the pad. "Stand comfortably," Bruce said. The stuntman adjusted his stance slightly, widening his feet on instinct. He gripped the edges of the shield more firmly now, though he still wore the same relaxed smile. The crew slowly formed a loose half-circle around them. No one had been told to gather. It just happened. A few feet away, the stunt coordinator watched with his arms crossed. His expression had changed from mild interest to something more careful. Bruce raised one fist. He didn't pull it back. He placed it only a short distance from the center of the shield, close enough that several of the crew frowned slightly. Unsure how any real force would come from that position, someone whispered quietly behind the group, "He's not even loading it." Bruce glanced at the stuntman. "Ready?" The man nodded. For a brief moment, nothing happened. The room felt strangely still. The overhead lights hummed softly. Somewhere behind them, a piece of metal equipment shifted as someone set it down too carefully. Then Bruce exhaled. It was a small breath, almost invisible, but the instant that breath left him, his body moved. The punch traveled only a few inches. Yet it landed with a sharp, compact sound against the pad. The stuntman holding it staggered backward before he could stop himself. One step, then another. His balance broke for a moment, forcing him to catch himself against the edge of a nearby crate. The shield never left his hands, but his footing had. For a second, nobody spoke. Not because nothing had happened, because it had happened too quickly for anyone to understand it at first. Bruce lowered his hand again, relaxed as before. Across the half-circle of crew members, several smiles had faded. The joke that started the moment had quietly disappeared, and in its place, something heavier had settled into the room. For a moment, the stuntman just stood there. The padded shield was still pressed against his chest, but his footing hadn't fully recovered yet. He shifted his weight once, testing the floor beneath him as if something about that brief impact hadn't made sense. A few of the crew glanced at each other. Someone near the back let out a quiet breath. It hadn't looked like much. That was the strange part. The punch had traveled only a few inches. No big wind-up, no loud crack, just a quick movement that seemed almost too small to create the reaction everyone had just seen. The stuntman gave a short laugh, but it sounded different now. "Okay," he said, adjusting the shield slightly. "Didn't expect that." Bruce Lee didn't respond. He simply stepped back half a pace, letting the man settle again. The crew leaned in a little closer. Curiosity had replaced the earlier amusement. A grip who had been standing by the lighting rack slowly walked forward, stopping near the edge of the circle. Someone else crouched down beside a cable case so he could see clearly. The stunt coordinator watched carefully. He had seen demonstrations before, enough to recognize the difference between something exaggerated for show and something controlled for proof. What had just happened looked closer to the second. The stuntman holding the shield straightened his shoulders. "Again," he said. This time there was no laughter behind the request. Bruce studied him for a moment, not judging, just observing the way the man planted his feet and braced his arms more firmly around the pad. "Relax," Bruce said quietly. The stuntman loosened his stance slightly. That instruction confused a few people watching. Most of them expected someone absorbing a strike to brace harder, not less. But the man followed the suggestion anyway, perhaps out of curiosity. Bruce stepped forward again. The space between them was small, only a few feet. Once more, Bruce raised his fist, and once again, it stopped only a short distance from the shield. Several crew members leaned forward. Now they were watching carefully. There was still no visible preparation, no tightening of the shoulders, no deep breath. Bruce's posture looked almost casual. For a brief second, the room held its breath without realizing it. Then the strike came. Just as compact as before. The sound against the pad was dull but solid. This time, the stuntman didn't just step back. His upper body rocked sharply, forcing him to take 2 quick steps to keep his balance. The shield shifted slightly in his grip before he managed to steady himself again. A few people behind him reacted immediately, not loudly, just quiet sounds of surprise. One of the electricians muttered something under his breath. Another man shook his head slowly, as if replaying the movement in his mind. The stuntman lowered the shield. He stared at Bruce for a moment, breathing out through his nose as the impact settled through his chest. Then he gave a short nod. Not the casual kind. The kind people give when they realize they've just misjudged something. Across the circle, no one was laughing anymore. And Bruce Lee had still barely moved. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The stuntman rolled his shoulders once, still holding the shield. His expression had changed. The relaxed grin from earlier had faded into something quieter. Part curiosity, part disbelief. "Again," he said, but this time the word came slower. Bruce looked at him for a moment. Not challenging, just measuring the distance, the stance, the way the man now held the shield tighter against his body. Around them, the half-circle had grown. A few more crew members had drifted closer. One of the grips stood with a coil of cable hanging loosely in his hands, completely forgotten. Someone else had climbed onto the edge of a crate to see over the shoulders in front of him. The stunt coordinator didn't move. He just watched. Bruce stepped forward. The space between them felt smaller now, not because it had changed, but because everyone in the room had started paying attention to it. He lifted his fist again. Same distance. Same calm posture. From the outside, it still didn't look like anything special. No dramatic movement. No visible tension in his shoulders. But the room had grown very quiet. Even the small background noises of the set seemed to fade, the clink of tools, the shifting of cables. People were listening without meaning to. Bruce exhaled once, then the strike came. Short, direct. The fist traveled only those few inches again, but the result was immediate. The stuntman's body jolted backward before his feet even reacted. He stumbled hard this time, his heel catching the edge of the floor mat as he tried to regain balance. For a brief second, it looked like he might fall. He didn't, but he had to grab the side of a crate to stop himself. The padded shield slipped slightly in his arms before he steadied it again. Someone behind the circle whispered something sharp under their breath. Another man just shook his head slowly. Bruce lowered his hand. No celebration. No explanation. He simply stepped back. The stuntman stood there breathing quietly, adjusting his grip on the shield as if trying to understand what had just happened. The laughter that had filled the set earlier felt very far away now, because in less than 6 seconds, the entire mood of the room had shifted. And everyone standing there knew it. For a while, no one spoke, not because anyone had asked for silence. It simply settled over the room on its own. The stuntman lowered the padded shield slowly, still holding it against his side. He rolled his shoulders once, then pressed a hand lightly against the center of his chest, as if checking where the force had landed. His expression wasn't angry. It was thoughtful. That seemed to matter more to the people watching. Across the half-circle, several crew members shifted their weight quietly. A few of them looked at Bruce Lee again, this time more carefully than before. Not studying his posture for tricks, just noticing the calm way he stood there, breathing normally, hands relaxed. Someone near the lighting rack gave a small whistle under his breath. Another man shook his head. He started, but didn't finish the sentence. The stunt coordinator finally stepped forward a few inches. He didn't ask Bruce anything. He didn't need to. Instead, he looked at the stuntman who'd been holding the shield. "You good?" he asked. The man nodded. "Yeah." He tapped the shield lightly with his knuckles, almost testing it. "Didn't see that coming." A few of the crew exchanged quiet glances. Earlier, the jokes had moved easily across the room, one comment feeding another, laughter bouncing off the concrete floor and metal equipment. Now the same men seemed careful about what they said, not embarrassed, just adjusting. Bruce hadn't tried to prove anything loudly. He hadn't corrected anyone or explained how the strike worked. In fact, he had barely spoken at all, but the room had already reached its own conclusion. The stuntman looked back at Bruce and gave a small nod. Not dramatic, just honest. "Respect," he said. Bruce returned the nod just as quietly. Then he stepped back toward the edge of the set floor, the same place he had been standing before the moment began. Almost immediately, the normal sounds of the production started creeping back into the room. Someone resumed taping a cable. A camera assistant rolled the dolly track a few inches into position, but the energy had changed. People were still working. They were just looking at Bruce Lee differently now. Work slowly returned to normal. A camera operator checked the frame through the viewfinder. Someone near the lights adjusted a filter that had slipped slightly out of place. The quiet rhythm of the set started building again, the same way it had before the moment began, but the mood wasn't quite the same. People moved with the same routine, yet their eyes drifted back toward Bruce Lee from time to time. He had already stepped away from the center of the floor. Back near the edge of the set, he stood the way he always had, calm, shoulders loose, attention moving quietly across the room as if nothing unusual had happened at all. The stuntman who had held the shield sat it down beside the equipment cases. He stretched his arms once, then rubbed his chest again briefly. A couple of the crew members walked over. Not loudly, just curious. What did it feel like? One of them asked. The stuntman thought about the question for a second. "Short," he said. That was the only word he used, but the way he said it made a few of them nod. Because everyone who had been watching understood what he meant. The punch had been small, almost invisible in preparation, yet the force behind it had arrived faster than the body could organize itself against it. One of the electricians leaned against a crate and glanced toward Bruce. "Didn't look like much," he murmured. The stuntman smiled slightly. "Exactly." Across the stage, the assistant director clapped his hands lightly, back to positions. Crew members moved again, returning to their marks, lifting equipment, checking cables. Within minutes, the set looked the same as before. Another film crew preparing to roll cameras. But small moments like that don't disappear completely. They stay with the people who see them. No one wrote it down that day. No big announcement followed. It wasn't treated like a dramatic challenge or a victory. It was simply a brief correction, a quiet answer to a casual doubt. Years later, a few of the people who had stood in that half-circle would still remember it the same way. Not the joke that started it, not the laughter, just the sudden shift that followed. Because sometimes a room full of people can feel the exact moment when assumption turns into respect. And once that moment passes, The silence afterward says everything.